Good afternoon. My name is John Nicholas. Welcome to Gettysburg National Military Park on the night of June 2nd, 1864, just slightly over 150 years ago. This is the night before the big battle of Cold Harbor, where the Union Army is going to make an attack the next morning at 5:30 in the morning. The Union Army will lose somewhere between 4,000 and 7,000 men in the space of about an hour. The night before that attack, one of General Grant's aides, Horace Porter, is riding through a Union brigade camp, actually a Union regimental camp. And he sees a bunch of men sitting around sewing. He thinks this is a strange thing to do the night before a big battle, sitting around sewing. These men are going to face a big battle next morning. You'd think they'd be doing a lot of other things, maybe praying, writing last letters home, looking at their equipment, trying to get some sleep, anything but sewing. But as he gets closer, he discovers what they're really doing. These men have taken pieces of paper. And this would not be the first time or the last time this would happen. And they've written their names on those pieces of paper, and their addresses. They're sewing them to the backs of their uniform coats. So the next morning, when they are killed, their bodies could be identified. And I've often wondered, how could these men do this? How could they almost go willingly to their death? So this is a program, this is their story. Who these men were, why they joined the Army, how they experienced Army life and combat, and then finally what happened to them after the Civil War. And oftentimes, sometimes that's not a happy story. At the start of the Civil War, the regular United States Army only numbers 16,000 soldiers that are spread all across the continent. They're only increased in strength to about 28,000 during the war, yet 2.2 million men will serve in Union armies during the war, and over 950,000 will serve in Confederate armies during the war. And for the most part, they're state volunteers. They're joining the Army, they're state volunteers. They're joining the Army for a lot of different reasons. And I think it's very important for you to understand that the reason why men are joining the Army are sometimes different from the cause of the war. Sometimes there are two different things why men are joining the Army, and sometimes the reason why they're joining it has nothing to do with the cause of the war at all. At the start of the Civil War, a lot of men are joining the Army to preserve the Union. And we think that's kind of a strange concept today. Union, why are you going to fight to preserve the Union? But it wasn't a strange idea to these men at all. A lot of the men are immigrants. And in the 1860s, almost every country in the world has a king, a queen, an emperor, or dictator. This is the way it's always been. This is the way it's supposed to be. United States of America is the only place in the world at the time pretty much where you could elect your own government, your own leaders. And many of these people are refugees from the revolutions of 1848, where people had risen up back in Europe to try and overthrow the old aristocracy. And all those revolutions had failed. And so they're coming to the United States and they're joining the Union Army to restore democracy. They realize if a small group of people do not like the results of an election or are not going to wait around for the next election to elect their own president, then they're going to take their own states out of the Union, which the founders had believed was supposed to be founded in perpetuity. Then democracy in America has no chance to survive. These men understood exactly what they're fighting for: a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And so strong is this idea, this concept of union, that over 200,000 Southerners will serve in Union armies all throughout the war from every Confederate state. Most people don't realize there's a lot of Southerners in Union armies. When you consider 950,000 men served in Confederate armies, 200,000 Southerners served in Union armies is a big number. At the start of the war, a lot of men are not fighting to end slavery. There are some that are joining the Army to end slavery, but others, while they're opposed to slavery, they're really opposed to the expansion of slavery. They're fine where it is, but they don't want to see slavery expanded. But as Union soldiers move to the Deep South, they see what a brutal institution slavery is, and they realize that slavery somehow caused this war. In order to win this war, slavery has to die. In the Confederacy, only 20 to 25% of Southerners actually own a slave. Yet large numbers of Southerners are going to fight a war to support slavery. That doesn't seem to make any sense. Or are you going to fight a war to support slavery when you don't have a slave? Well, there's lots of reasons why men would fight a war to support slavery, and I think after I explain them to you, it'll make a lot of sense. First, for the most part, slavery has existed for the last 250 years. This is the way things have always been. This is the way it's supposed to be. People hate change. And if slavery is gone, this is going to change everything. Imagine what our lives would be like today if suddenly every car and truck and bus and vehicle or every computer in the entire world disappeared. You may not like computers, you may not like cars, but your life is affected by those things anyway. And if slavery is gone, that changes everything. If you own a slave, congratulations, you're making it. You're making it big. A slave in today's dollars is going to cost you somewhere around $20,000 to $30,000. That's a lot of money. That's like buying a car. Think how you felt when you got your first car. Yeah, I'm somebody now. And if you own a slave, you are now somebody. Even if you have to work in the fields with that slave, you're somebody. And your neighbor's going to notice you're making it. So if you own a slave, you're making it big. But suppose you'll never get any money to buy a slave. You're never going to be able to afford a slave. Well, there's reasons why you might afford to support slavery as well. First of all, if you think of the South as a big, giant high school, at the top are the seniors, the slave owners. Yeah, you may not like them, but secretly, you know you'd really like to be one of them because they're at the top. They're calling all the shots, the governors, they're the congressmen, they're all the big landowners in the South, even presidents of the United States. You may not like them, but secretly, you'd like to be one of them. Just below them is the middle class. Middle class, even in the 1850s, barely exists. These are people that are lawyers, doctors, mill owners. They work on the railroads and factories. You may only know a couple people in that junior class, the middle class. Next class is a huge class. That's sophomore class. These are poor white southern dirt farmers. They're just getting by year after year after year. They're barely making it, but the big thing they can say is at least they're not in that freshman class where the slaves are. Nobody ever wants to be a freshman ever again. And if slavery is gone, then some of those freshmen are going to move up in your class. Some of them are going to move even higher, and some of you sophomores are going to be moving down. I once asked some third graders, actually some fifth graders, how they would feel if suddenly the next day they came to school and suddenly there were a bunch of third graders in their class. And some of those third graders are going to move up into 6th and 7th grade ahead of them. And some of those fifth graders are going to move back down to the 3rd and 2nd grade. How would they like that? They didn't think it was too good of an idea. So this is the way it's always been. You don't want to move down. Nobody ever likes the idea of moving down the world. But finally, this is one big, huge reason why Southerners would fight a war to support slavery. There have been slave rebellions in the South the last 150 years. Brutal slave rebellions, then Mark Vesey's Rebellion, Gabriel's Rebellion, Nat Turner's Revolt, and then in 1859, there's John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. White Southerners from the North, white Northerners from the North that want to raid Harper's Ferry and arm slaves to lead them in a slave revolt. This is just like Pearl Harbor. This is just like 9/11 all over again. For Southerners, this is absolutely terrifying. So for Southerners, slavery is a social institution, an economic condition, a cultural condition, but finally at the very bottom, it's a life and death condition. For the last 200 years, every month you served on a slave patrol, patrolling the South to prevent these slave rebellions. But as I said, there's lots of other reasons why men are joining the Army as well. Some of them are not volunteers. Some of them are drafted in the Army. The Confederacy starts the very first draft in April of 1862. And in March and April, there's sort of an unofficial draft. There's kind of a stigma against being drafted. You don't want to be drafted, have your neighbors know you had to be hauled into the Army. My own Confederate ancestors, they joined the Army 4 days before the draft went into effect, so I kind of think it wasn't quite voluntary. But the draft takes in everybody. First they're drafting 18 to 35-year-olds. Then they're drafting 18 to 45-year-olds. In the last year, the war is going to start drafting 17 to 50-year-olds. From mid-1862 on, 1/4 to 1/3 of the Confederate Army is made of draftees. And the draft in the Confederacy is very unpopular. There's a great deal of draft resistance, especially in areas where slavery doesn't exist and where the Confederate government is very unpopular. In the North, they have their own draft. And it's very unpopular there too, surprisingly. There's draft rights in New York City and in other Midwestern cities. There's a great deal of resistance. But the draft in the North doesn't really take in that many people. Only about 50,000 Northerners are drafted to the Army. There's supposed to be another 70,000 that should have been in the Army, but somehow they have gotten out of the draft. And there were ways to get out of the draft. If you were rich, you could hire a substitute to go in your place, pay that man some money. He would go in your place. He would also collect a state bonus, so maybe a couple $100 or so, and then he's probably going to desert. And also, if you're a rich Southerner, if you own 20 or more slaves, which means you're worth over $10.5 million, that's going to get you out of the Army. In the North, if you pay $300, that's about $66,000 a day. $66,000 back then, or actually $66,000 right now, that will get you out of the Army. So there's a saying that says, this is a rich man's war and a poor man's fight. And then there's other reasons why guys are joining the Army. At the start of the war, there's a lot of young men that are joining the Army, and they don't make a lot of money. If you work in a factory, you may make $10 or $20 a month. If you're on a farm, you may make $30 or $50 a month, and then the next month you may be out of work. The next month you may be out of work again, and then you might only make $5 or $10. And the Army, if you're in the Confederate Army, will pay you $11 a month. The Union Army will pay you $13 a month, plus you'll collect a state bonus. That's not a lot of money, but you'll do this for a couple months. It'll be a good nest egg for when you get out of the Army. And then a very big reason why men are joining the Army is girls. A lot of guys don't think this war is going to last for very long, and they're going to join the Army to impress a girl. At the start of the Civil War, there's a very popular song in the North, I'm bound to be a soldier's wife or I want to die an old maid. A lot of these guys don't think war won't last long. It'll be over in 6 weeks, 3 months. I'll be in one big battle, come home a hero. Maybe I'll even get wounded. Nothing too disfiguring. You don't want to lose an arm or a leg. You definitely don't want to lose your head. But if you come home with a nice bandage on or your arm in a sling, Mary Jenny, she's going to look pretty good at you. And she's going to, I want to take care of you. And so you want to impress a girl. And so girls are a big reason why men are joining the Army. In Alabama, there's been one young man who's been reluctant to enlist. He gets a package from his fiancée. Inside the package is a dress and a note that says either join up or put this on. So women are a big factor in getting men to join the Army. Later on, they're going to be a big factor in getting men to desert from the Army. And finally, there's a huge reason why men are joining the Army. That's because everybody is doing it. Their friends, their neighbors, their fathers, their sons, their cousins, their brothers are all doing it, and they want to get in. They've never been more than 25 miles away from home. This is going to be exciting. They're going to follow in the footsteps of their grandfathers in the Revolution. They're going to come back big heroes, and they're going to get all the girls when they come back home. So you're joining up because everybody you know is doing it. And so you want to join the Army, and the first thing you've got to do is you've got to go up to a recruiting officer and enlist. Now, at the start of the war, nobody thinks the war is going to last for very long. They think it's going to be over in 3 months. And they realize somebody's going to get hurt, but it's not going to be them. They believe that if you have lived a morally upright life, if you don't drink, you don't gamble, you don't smoke, if you're a good church-going man, nothing's going to happen to you. All those bullets are going to fly past you and hit some of those sinners back there. But most of the sinners are on the other side. So you don't have to worry about it. Nothing's going to happen to you. So people don't think this war is going to last long. They don't think anybody's going to really get hurt that bad. So you want to get in the Army, and people think the war is going to be over soon, and there's a lot of guys who are 17, 16, 15, 14, even 13. They want to get into this big thing before it's all over. But you got to be 18 to be in the Army. And you've been told it's a sin to tell a lie. So how you can get in the Army if you're not 18? Well, they figured out a way to do this. What they'll do, take a piece of paper, they'll write the number 18 on it. They'll put it in their shoe, and they'll walk up to the recruiting officer, and he will ask, are you over 18? And you can say, why, yes. Yes, I am. I'm definitely over 18. So that's going to get you in. Then you're in the Army now, but now you have to pass a physical examination. You have to pass a physical examination. We know it wasn't too strenuous because at least 240 women will serve in Confederate armies during the war, and at least 400 will serve in Union armies during the war. And a lot of times these men did not know women were in their ranks. It would be disguised all throughout the war. Sometimes they wouldn't be found out until they were wounded. After the war, they're going to veterans reunions, and one Private Albert Cashier, is going to reunions year after year, always showing up smartly wearing the uniform. One year, Private Cashier shows up wearing a dress, which caused a great deal of confusion at the reunion. Now, sometimes men did know that there were women in the ranks. There was one Union general who wrote his wife one night, "This morning, one of my sergeants just gave birth to a baby boy." And that is against all the laws of war that I know of. So the physical examination wasn't too strenuous. First, you had to be able to see, not out of both eyes, but at least out of one eye. You had to be able to hear, to have most of your fingers, not all of them, but you had to have most of them. But if you, as Private Barney Fife will tell you, if you lose this one, you're going to be out of business. And then you have to be able to march and move around and things like that. And then finally, you have to have at least 2 teeth. One has to be on the top, and one has to be on the bottom. Let me look at your teeth, mister. Okay, you're going to make it. Okay. So you passed the physical examination. You're joining up with all your friends and neighbors, usually from the same town or village or county, and you're sent to a camp of instruction with people from your other state. You're going to be put into a regiment. And right away, people are going to start getting sick. People don't know about infectious diseases back then. If you're on a farm, you might get sick, or even if you're in a city, you're going to get sick. Disease is a big killer during the Civil War. A lot of men will die of malaria, dysentery, typhoid, diarrhea, the flu, the measles, the mumps, chicken pox. If you ever watched Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara's first husband never fires a shot in the battle. He actually dies of the measles. Hard to imagine today. So large numbers of men are going to die from disease. And then you go to this camp of instruction, and people are yelling at you. They're telling you what to do. And these people are people you've elected as your sergeants, your lieutenants, and your captains and your colonels. These people are called officers. And you've elected them, and now they're telling you what to do. If you go up on a farm, nobody tells you what to do. How dare Jim tell me what to do? Who does he think he is? I'm not going to do it. Well, if you don't want to do what Jim tells you, what Colonel Jim tells you, the Army has ways to encourage you to do what the colonel wants. If you straggle and lag behind, you may find yourself riding a wooden pony for several hours, up to 10 or 12 hours at a time. Not going to be too comfortable. If you want to fire off your musket, waste valuable Army ammunition, or to commit other crimes, you could be strung up by your thumbs for 10 to 12 hours a day where your feet are barely touching the ground. This was a very popular punishment during the Civil War. It'll dislocate your shoulders, your thumbs, the blood vessels will burst in them. Very, very painful. If you want to go out and steal some farmer's chickens, you may find yourself wearing a wooden overcoat. Kind of embarrassing, huh? You think you could wear something like that? So you may be wearing this barrel for a while, and then if you talk back, well, you could be bucked and gagged, seated in this position for 10 or 12 hours a day for up to 2 weeks at a time. You sit like this for 2 weeks, you're not going to talk back anymore. And there may be a reason why you might want to go out and steal a chicken or something like that. That's because the food in the Army really isn't that great. You might get canned food, if you're lucky. Canned food was starting to become cheap during the Civil War. But prior to the Civil War, only rich folks could get good canned food like canned milk. Gail Borden has figured out in 1857 how to can milk. He's selling it to the Army. And Gilbert Van Camp has figured out a way to can beans. He's selling it in the Army. Prior to the Civil War, you had to be rich to eat good stuff like this. But the Army can buy it cheaply now, so you might get some canned beans. You're going to get some hard bread, something called hardtack. And I'm going to pass this around. I don't want you to break it because I'll string you up by your thumbs. I don't want you to try and eat it because I cannot be responsible for your dental bills. So pass that down the line, sir. Pass that down the line, ma'am. And you can pass this down the line. Now you can make hardtack yourself at home. All it is 6 parts flour, 1 part water, a little bit of salt. You're going to roll it out into a dough. You're going to put it into a pan. You'll cut it into 4-inch squares, poke some holes in it, put it in the oven, bake it for an hour. It will last you for 100 years. Soldiers have another name for hardtack. They call them jawbreakers, teeth dullers, sheet iron crackers. Oftentimes they'll sit outside and get bugs in them. They call them worm castles. You ever had a worm castle for breakfast before? How's it sound? Not too good, huh? Hardtack is so hard, one day, an Illinois soldier was talking to a friend of his. And he said, this morning, I bit into a piece of hardtack. And I bit into something soft. And his friend said, did you bite into a weevil? And he said, no, I bit into a nail. So that's how hard hardtack is. I'll take that right there. And you're also going to get some other food. You're going to get vegetables, but not vegetables you really recognize. You're going to get something called desiccated vegetables. Peas and carrots and cabbage shredded and formed into a brick and dehydrated. And you're going to cook it, boil it in water for hours. It has no nutritional value. One soldier said it tasted like a dirty mop. But at least the Army's giving you vegetables. And then you also get some meat. You're going to find yourself eating a lot of bacon in the Army, something called salt pork. And this salt pork has turned a little bit bad. Hopefully this soldier would, trim off the bad parts and, hopefully he wouldn't be in the hospital for too long. It didn't always come like this. Usually it's supposed to come fresh, but sometimes it did set out for whiles, and oftentimes when it came in this condition, soldiers are having funerals for their salt pork, because you're going to eat a lot of bacon in the Army, a very good high cholesterol diet. So most of the food in the Army really isn't that great. But there's one particular item soldiers they find out they like an awful lot, and that item is called coffee. Before the Civil War, most Americans did not drink coffee. But the Army has always issued coffee to soldiers, and these men are getting coffee the first time they find out they like it. And they like it a lot. The first thing you're going to do when you get up in the morning is make some coffee. For breakfast, you're going to have some coffee. Before you go on a long march, you're going to drink some coffee. If there's a halt in the march, you're going to steal some fence rails and have some more coffee. When the march is over, you're going to have some more coffee. You're going to have some coffee with dinner. You're going to go on guard duty before you go. You're going to have some coffee. And then, before you go to bed, you're going to have some more coffee. These soldiers have a real drinking problem here. One Union soldier will write home, "I can drink 3 or 4 quarts of coffee a day, a whole gallon of coffee a day." I said, nobody can drink that much coffee. And then I found another account of a Union soldier said, "I can drink 4 to 6 quarts of coffee a day, and I always want more." Now, the Confederate Army, after the first year of the Civil War, they can't get the good stuff anymore. They can't get real coffee anymore, so then they're going to have to come up with substitutes for coffee. Coffee made from chicory, pine tree bark, green apples, green peas, green corn, potatoes. Stonewall Jackson's favorite coffee wasn't the real stuff. He liked coffee made from parched corn. Now, on the third day of this battle, just prior to Pickett's charge, Edward Porter Alexander, watching the Confederate artillery firing out here, he's drinking a mug of sweet potato coffee, which for some reason Starbucks still doesn't sell yet. I don't know why. After the war is over, these guys go home. They said, "Wow, I sure did like that coffee I had when I was in the Army. I like the way it made me feel, all excited and jumpy." And so Americans start drinking more coffee, and soon they're building Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks and getting hooked on lattes and cappuccinos and espressos. It's all because they got hooked on caffeine during the Civil War. Well, these men didn't join the Army, at least most of them didn't join the Army to drink coffee. They joined the Army to become soldiers, and they want to look like soldiers. At the start of the Civil War, everybody thought it would be a great idea to show up with your own uniform. This caused a problem at the Battle of First Manassas, where Confederate soldiers showed up wearing blue uniforms, were being shot at by their own people, and Union soldiers showed up wearing gray uniforms. They were being shot at by their own people. So then they settled on a standard uniform. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to get some underwear, which for some of these boys was kind of a novelty. But it's going to be important later on after they're killed in order to be able to identify the bodies. If you go into the National Cemetery, you'll see that half the soldiers that are buried there are buried as unknowns. In some cases, complete unknowns. The way they were identified was by their underwear, because Confederate soldiers wore cotton or linen underwear, Union soldiers wore wool underwear, which could have been too comfortable in July. You're going to be issued a linen shirt, nice shirt, not too bad. You're going to get some wool trousers, and you'll see that these trousers are blue, so you might think they're for a Union soldier. They could be for a Union soldier, or they could be for a Confederate soldier. Florida issued their soldiers blue trousers. Confederate officers, a lot of them wore blue trousers. Robert E. Lee, all throughout the Civil War, wore blue pants. So you're going to get some trousers, and because it's so incredibly cold in July and August, you're going to get a wool jacket as well. Now, A lot of people think, how can they wear wool in the summertime? I've been told by reenactors this isn't quite so bad. What happens is wool is a breathable fabric. You build up a layer of sweat. And it can be just like this, and it won't be quite as hot with that on. Then you'll get a few additional items. You get some shoes called brogans and some wool socks. This soldier is a lucky soldier because he has a left and a right shoe. Most shoes weren't made that way. Most shoes you put on either foot and you just had to make it work for you. And the term shoddy comes from the Civil War. It actually applies to shoes because they fall apart so much. So you got some shoes, and then you're going to get a few additional items. I was told by a boy the other day that this is a man purse. This is not a man purse. This is a cartridge box. This is what you're going to carry your ammunition in. 40 rounds of ammunition, you'll carry that in here. It's a cartridge box. So you'll have that slung over your shoulder. You're going to get a belt. And on the belt will be a cap box. Inside here is your ignition system for your musket. And you're also going to get a bayonet. Now, I usually ask kids, do they think these hurt a lot of people during the Civil War? They always say, oh yeah, lots of people had to be hurt by these. No, a lot of people are not hurt by bayonets during the Civil War, and I'll show you why. If you got 100, 200, 300, 400 people running at you like this, are you going to stick around to find out what happens next? No, you're not. So bayonets hurt very few people during the Civil War. But they do have other uses. You can use it to cook your salt pork over the fire. You can use it to stake down a horse or a tent. You can use it as a shovel, as an entrenching tool, or at night when you're in your tent telling people how much you like Army life. It also makes, or writing letters home rather, it also makes a very attractive candle holder. So bayonets have other uses besides poking people. And then you're going to get a few other items because you're a traveling man. You're going to get a suitcase. Actually, before that, you're going to get a canteen. Inside here, you're going to have water or coffee or milk or other things you don't want your officers to know about. This is a Union-made canteen. Tin stamped. These were very popular with the Confederate Army. The reason why is they had wooden drum canteens that leaked, that actually held more liquid. But these are popular also because you could take them, cut them in half, and turn them into frying pans. You're going to get a combination junk drawer and lunchbox, something called a haversack right here. You're going to have your 3 days of rations in here, a bar of soap, letters from home, maybe a Bible. You're going to have something called a shovel that you're going to eat off of, something else called a shovel that you're going to drink coffee out of. You're going to use these sometimes as entrenching tools. Then you're going to get a suitcase. Again, something called a knapsack, which is very heavy. Has about 40 pounds of equipment in it. Soldiers often carry too much stuff, and these things, when they get wet, become even heavier, so they'll throw them away and take a rubber blanket and a wool blanket and wrap all their belongings up into something called a horse collar or bedroll and wear it over their shoulder. Finally, they will get a nice little cap called a kepi. Very popular during the Civil War. It doesn't do a lot to keep the rain or sun out of your eyes, so a lot of soldiers will switch them for a slouch hat like this. A lot more nicer, more sophisticated looking as well. And then finally, you'll get a single shot muzzle loading rifle. Very complicated piece of machinery. I'm often asked, why do soldiers fight in these big long lines? Why are they standing shoulder to shoulder? Well, prior to the Civil War, you had a smoothbore musket. Could fire maybe 1 to 3 shots a minute, and it fired a round musket ball that looks just like this, like a marble. And the only maximum effective range for a smoothbore musket was maybe 50 or 60 yards, not that far away at all. So you fired a couple of shots like this, then you went to the bayonet and chased the enemy away. Now they knew if you cut spiral grooves in the barrel, it would cause the musket ball to spin. You could shoot a lot farther, out to 400, maybe out to 1,000 yards. The problem was, after you fired 4 or 5 shots, the gunpowder residue built up so much in this barrel here, you cannot ram one of these down the barrel. So muskets were not very effective. Rifle muskets were not that effective. Well, prior to the Civil War, A French army captain by the name of Claude Minié invents a new type of ammunition called the Minié ball. And I'm going to pass this around so you can see what it's like. Pass them down the line. Look at these Minié balls right here. You'll see it's not round, but it's conical shape. It's got 3 rings around the back and it's got a cup in the back of it. The thing about the Minié ball, which could be made smaller than the barrel. And the Americans would call these mini balls. Smaller than the barrel, so now you can ram it down there. When you fire the musket, the explosion from the gunpowder will cause that cup in the back to expand. And these 3 rings will catch the rifling, the grooves, and the barrels. And now you can shoot not 50 or 60 yards, but out to 400, 500, 600, out to 1,000 yards. Now, generally, soldiers are not going to shoot at something 1,000 yards away. Even today, with a modern M16, a modern M4, on a U.S. Army qualification range, the farthest target away is about 300 meters, about 300 yards. Most soldiers will not shoot that at a target that far away because they can't hit it. They won't start shooting until they see targets pop up at 200 meters or less. But now you got something that's a lot more accurate. Got a better chance of hitting the target. But there's also something else that makes the mini ball so deadly. The old round musket ball, when it struck bone, caused the bone to break. Nobody ever dies generally of a broken arm or something like that. But the mini ball has a lower muzzle velocity, and it brings dirty cloth and everything else that's out there into the wound. The thing about the mini ball is when it strikes a bone, it flattens out and causes the bone to shatter. And a shattered bone means amputation. So you may survive the mini ball the first time, then you have your arm or leg amputated. You may survive that, but infection may set in. Surgeons don't know about infectious diseases, so they're using the same surgical tools over and over again. Survive the amputation, but infection sets in, that requires a second amputation. Infection may set in again. There probably won't be a third amputation. You probably won't live that long enough. But fortunately, these could have caused a lot more casualties if soldiers had been better trained. People want to know why they're walking around in big long lines. The reason why is firing this, as I said, you can only shoot 50 or 60 yards. The only way you could hit somebody was by lining up men shoulder to shoulder and shooting a wall of lead down range. Now, maybe 100 guys, maybe 4 or 5 of them might hit the enemy maybe 100 yards away. So that might cause some casualties. But the mini ball is a lot more deadly, but it's also these men, they spend all their time marching around learning to march these big long lines. They don't spend a lot of time loading these muskets. And it's a very complicated process to load a Civil War musket. It takes 9 steps. And the first step is you take the musket and you put it in front of you like this. Not like this, because you could shoot your face off. Out like this. Then you pull out a cartridge. This is where your ammunition is, where the mini ball and gunpowder is, a paper cartridge. Remember I said you had to have 2 teeth to be in the Army. You take the tail in your teeth and you tear it off. So you expose the gunpowder, then you pour the gunpowder and the bullet down the barrel. Thank you, sir. Thank you. You pull out the rammer and you ram all that stuff down the barrel really good. The next step is a very important step, something that soldiers often forgot to do. You have to take the rammer back out. A lot of soldiers often forget to do this, and they would shoot off the rammer. They have to find another musket again. There's actually one soldier killed here at Gettysburg had a rammer shot through his chest. Now you've just poured gunpowder and a bullet down a hot barrel. You don't want to put your hand over the barrel, or else you're going to shoot your hand off. You're going to push the rammer back down with your pinky. You pick up the musket, cock the hammer back halfway. And I can pull the trigger right here and you'll see this musket will not go off half cocked. That's where that phrase comes from. You pull out a cap, a little percussion cap filled with fulminated mercury, a little brass cap like that from your cap box. Put it underneath the hammer. Cock the hammer back all the way at full cock, and now you're ready to fire. Very complicated piece of machinery. Oftentimes soldiers forget steps. On this battlefield, after the battle's over, they find 28,000 muskets on the battlefield. Of those, 24,000 were still loaded. Of those 24,000, 12,000 had more than 1 load in them. 6,000 had between 3 and 10 loads in them. And one musket found on this battlefield after the battle's over has 23 loads in it. The soldier kept loading and loading. They forgot to put his cap on, didn't realize he wasn't shooting. Sometimes this caused problems. At the Battle of Antietam, Still the single bloodiest day in American history so far, where 23,110 men will be killed in the space of 12 hours. This is a brand new regiment, the 16th Connecticut. They were formed in mid-August 1862. Leave Hartford at the end of the month to go down to Washington, D.C. September 7th, they leave Washington, D.C. to march towards Sharpsburg, Maryland, and Antietam Creek. And the day before, the single bloodiest day in American history, the 16th Connecticut is learning to load their muskets for the very first time. They go into the fight on the southern end of the battlefield. They have 840 men. They're attacked by a South Carolina brigade. They actually outnumber the South Carolinians by a good large margin. The South Carolinians are all veterans, and the 16th Connecticut has only learned to load their muskets the day before. They fire all of maybe 1 or 2 shots and inflict maybe 5 or 8 casualties on the South Carolinians. South Carolinians fire back in the space of about 5 or 10 minutes. The 16th Connecticut will lose about 300 soldiers. And it was a disaster for them. 2 soldiers are so scared after Antietam, they run back to Washington, D.C. They hop on a train to go up to New York City. They hop on a ship for London, England. They will spend the rest of their lives in England, never come back to America because of their experience on September 17, 1862. Well, you have been in the Army now for a little while. Hopefully you've had a couple months of training, but usually it's only a couple of weeks. You're getting very little sleep. You're eating bad food, and not even much of that. You're tired all the time. You're dirty all the time. You learn to live with fleas, ticks, lice, flies, mosquitoes. You see friends go in the hospital with malaria, dysentery, typhoid, diarrhea, and they don't come back. And then, in the days leading up to the first battle, you're out in the rain, the snow, the heat, and the mud. You're marching along roads of dirt roads with thousands of men on them. Oftentimes, if it's raining, the roads will soon turn to mud until become several feet deep until they become impassable. If the roads are dry, huge clouds of dust are going to hang over those columns. You can barely see or breathe. You may be marching 10 or 15 or 30 miles a day. It's very hot. Men are passing out from the heat. Alongside the roads you see dozens, sometimes hundreds of men in the woods. Some have fainted, some are dying of heat stroke, some of them are already dead. You begin to notice a lot of men in your own regiment are beginning to drop out as well. You're marching along day after day, you're hearing hundreds of rumors, hundreds of them. After a while you become sick of them. You don't know what to believe, get tired of hearing them, you don't know where you're going, and neither does anyone else. Then one day, you hear what sounds like thunder. Maybe for a minute you try and convince yourself, yeah, that's what it is, it's thunder, but you know what it really is, it's cannon fire. You search your brain for some other explanation, but you know it's cannon fire. And now your heart begins beating faster. The officers tell you to pick up the pace. As you get closer to the battlefield, the cannon fire gets louder and louder, and your heart is beating faster and faster, and adrenaline is shooting through your body. And now you're beginning to see stragglers, men that have left their regiments for some reason or another. Some claim to be wounded but look unhurt. Others are sick. Others are helping a wounded friend to a hospital, and you can bet they're not going to come back. And some of them have just left. And you begin to notice that some of the men in your own regiment, a lot of men in your own regiment, have just left. But you're staying with your regiment. You're heading towards the battlefield, and more adrenaline is shooting through your body. As you get closer, you're seeing something that's kind of disturbing. You're seeing destroyed farms, dead farm animals. If you're a farm boy, this is a pretty bad sight to see. But as you get closer to the battlefield, you're seeing something you're not prepared to see. You're seeing wounded men, men that are somehow still alive. They've had an arm shot away, jaw shot away, their eyes shot out. Somehow they're still alive, though. And then you see the dead. Bodies cut in half by artillery fire, bodies without heads, heads without bodies, bodies mangled and pulverized in every possible condition. And there seems to be blood everywhere. The ground is slippery with it. You didn't know how a body had that much blood in them. As you get closer, come under artillery fire. The enemy isn't aiming at you, they're aiming at the front lines, but they're overshooting and shells are dropping in your ranks. And men are being killed and wounded, and there's nothing they can do about it. The officers tell you to lie down, and you hug the earth, and you wish that you could get underneath it. Finally, the shelling stops, and you get up and begin moving again. Then you stop, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and it seems like forever. Finally, The officers tell you it's time to move up in the line. And now your heart is really racing, and now adrenaline is shooting through your body. You think this is it. They tell you to load and cap your muskets and fix bayonets. But you're having problems because all this adrenaline is shooting through your body with coordination. You're fumbling with your cartridge, you're dropping caps, but finally you're ready to go. The command, forward march, is given. And you move forward and you move up on the line. It's not like you imagine it would be. There's noise. The noise is deafening, so loud you can't hear your officers. There's so much smoke you can't see more than maybe 70 or 80 yards in front of you. The one thing you can see is your colors, your battle flags. These were flags that were made by the people back home, presented to your regiment in a big ceremony. So not only do they represent your regiment and the bonds that connect you with your comrades, but they also represent the people back home. The honor to be part of the color guard, to be selected as the color bearer, but at the same time it's also a death warrant, because the enemy knows when those flags go forward, so will the rest of your regiment. So the color bearers and the color guard become targets right away. And then finally you move up onto the battlefield. And you get on the battlefield and you can't see anything. The officers give you a halt, and then through the smoke you see them. Indistinct dark forms, and you're told that's the enemy. Well, maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. It wouldn't be the first time a regiment fired on their own people. With so much smoke, it's almost impossible to tell. Officers give you the command, fire by volley. Ready, aim, fire. And you fire your musket and you pull the trigger, the musket slams into your shoulder, and you see some of those dark figures fall. Command is given to reload, and as you reload, a sheet of flame comes from that dark mass in front of you, and men don't fall. They're knocked out of the ranks by the dozens. Command is given to reload. You reload as fast as you can, and then fire by volley. Ready, aim, fire. You pull the trigger and fire your musket. More dark farmers fall, and then more men are being killed and wounded around you. And finally, the command is fire at will. Now you're loading and firing as fast as you can. Now your training is taking over. Now everything is done by reflex and by adrenaline. You're loading and shooting as fast as you can. Men around you are yelling. Some are screaming out in pain when they're killed or wounded. Some are not making a sound at all when they're dying. Other men are cursing. Some are even laughing. And you're loading and shooting as fast as you can, and more men are being killed and wounded all around you. And these are your friends. These are your neighbors back home. But you don't have much time to think about this at all. You're loading and shooting as fast as you can. Finally, after 20, 30, maybe 45 minutes, it's all over. It's because the enemy is retreated, or your regiment is retreated, or maybe because you've run out of ammunition, more likely because your regiment has suffered so many casualties that it's no longer combat effective. And you're pulled off the line. As you come off the line, your body is shaking, and you can't make it stop. You absolutely cannot make it stop. As hard as you try, you can't make it stop. But finally, all that adrenaline is used up, and you're physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted. You're stunned, and you don't quite understand what you've seen. If you've been killed, well, your battle is over. Hopefully you'll get a decent burial. But oftentimes the army's in a hurry and have to move on. So sometimes even the men on your own side would be buried in a large mass grave, sometimes as many as 200 bodies to a single grave. And burial parties in a hurry. They've got to get these bodies in the ground. Soldiers want to get in as many bodies as they can, so they will actually get in and jump on the bodies to pack in even more. One soldier said it was just like burying a dead dog. If you're one of the lucky dead, though, you'll get a headboard over your grave. A headboard is made from a cracker box or an ammunition box. It's just a wooden board with your name, your rank, regiment written on it, usually in pencil. But then it rains and the headboards get weather beaten, they get hard to read. So eventually you may become one of the 46% of the men that died in the Civil War and will eventually be listed as missing or unknown. Your family will never know what became of you. Many soldiers considered being wounded worse than being killed. A wounded soldier might lie in the battlefield for hours or even days in the rain and the heat and the sun, with farm animals rooting away at bodies. If you're rescued, that means a bumpy ride to a hospital where you may again lay for hours or days before a surgeon will look at you. If you've been shot in the stomach, the surgeons won't even look at you. Too hard to repair the damage. If you've been hit in the arm or leg, well, that could mean amputation. You know what that means. By the end of the war, battlefield medicine has improved so much. If you make it to a hospital, you have a 75% survival rate, if you make it to a hospital. But afterwards, your life is going to be pretty difficult. Over 674,000 men will be captured during the Civil War, and nobody ever figured on this happening. More captured men than in any other war America has ever fought. And both sides have not prepared for this. A soldier's chance of dying on a Civil War battlefield was about 5%. If you're captured, your chance of dying in a Civil War prison is about 13%. If you're a black soldier of the U.S. colored troops, your chance of dying is 35%. That's if you make it to a prison at all. Most will be bayoneted, shot, or hung before they even reach that prison. If you go to a prison, nobody ever figured on this. They suffer from overcrowding, poor planning, disease, and there's too many men in these prisons, public indifference, and eventually these Civil War prisons on both sides become concentration camps responsible for the slow, agonizing deaths of thousands of men. If you made it through this battle, well, you've been lucky. You made it today, but what about the next one after that? By 1864, in Virginia, around Atlanta, combat is almost continuous. Soldiers fighting day after day. The only halt in fighting is to march to a new position to fight again. And soldiers becoming fatalistic about their chances of surviving. Stop writing letters home, stop saving money, stop talking about what they're going to do after the war because it's something they can no longer imagine. If you're a Union soldier and you re-enlist, well, congratulations, you'll get to go home on a 30-day furlough. When you go back home, you find out that people, they just don't understand back home. They think, you know, if you're just brave, you'll win this war, but you know a lot better. And then you'll come back to your comrades. And now, you may still believe in the cause, whatever that is, but now you're fighting for a different reason. You're fighting because your comrades need you and because you need them. You're now fighting for each other. The idea that somebody will survive this war, and somebody will survive this war. Eventually, this war will come to an end, and soldiers will go home. If you're a Southerner in the Confederate Army, the South you knew is gone. 2/3 of the Southern economy is gone. Thousands of farms are gone. 25% of the men between the 18 and 35 are dead and gone. The world you knew is gone. If you're one of the 178,000 soldiers, the U.S. colored troops, 95,000 of them had been slaves before the Civil War. Go back home looking for their family members, and initially things are somewhat different for them. Things are a little bit better, but as former Confederates come back into political power in the 1880s and 1890s, you're going to find out things haven't changed that much for you either. If you're a Union soldier, where your side has won, congratulations. There's going to be a big parade in Washington, D.C. You're going to go to that, and when you come back home, you're going to find out things have changed as well. You're going to find out that people fear and distrust you. Think the war has turned you into a criminal, a villain, a rapist, a murderer. What has the war done to you? And by 1866, 2/3 the prison populations in most northern states are made up of Civil War veterans, but oftentimes it's the veterans that have to fear the people back home as well, who will often steal their bonuses and back pay they've earned during the war. At the same time, after the war, there's, especially for veterans, there's widespread unemployment. There's the Great Depression of 1873 that will last for years, and there's another one in 1893. It'll throw thousands of men out of work. Over 500,000 men were wounded during the war. 500,000. The state of Mississippi in 1866 has to spend 1/5 of their state budget on artificial limbs for their veterans. 1/5 of their budget. Other soldiers will become addicted to alcohol or opium, which is used as painkillers in the war. We now know that in North Carolina, at least, there's a rise in suicide rates and divorce rates after the war. And we know from a study of Civil War veterans in Indiana that there were probably large numbers of these men also suffered from post-traumatic stress syndrome. They would spend their lives in and out of insane asylums. Their families would not know what to do with them. But worst of all, these men are forgotten about after the war. After the war, America's changing. Railroads crisscross the country. It used to take 6 weeks to go from New York to San Francisco. Now you can do it in 4 days. Factories are springing up everywhere. Steel from Pennsylvania builds skyscrapers in Chicago and New York. Oranges from Florida can be bought in Boston. London from Wisconsin is used to build homes on the Great Plains, and the wheat fields and cornfields of Kansas now feed the entire world. But as I said, there's widespread unemployment among veterans. As one wounded Confederate veteran would write after the war, a carpenter with 2 hands always gets more work than a carpenter with only 1 hand. So these men are facing unemployment. They don't know how to support their families. At the same time, they're completely forgotten about. And America's changing, as I said. There's depression, economic disasters. People are moving from the farms to the cities, and those cities are exploding. Atlanta goes from 6,000 people in 1860 to 90,000 in 30 years. Chicago's population in 30 years increases 10 times from 100,000 to 1 million. Part of the population explosion is due to huge waves of immigration from Germany, Ireland, Southern and Eastern Europe, China, Japan, and Mexico. In even mid-sized cities like Lawrence, Massachusetts, 42% of the population made up of brand new immigrants. You can walk into any city in America through neighborhood after neighborhood and hear dozens of languages that are not your own. By the 1880s, Americans are confused and frightened about what happened to their country. They know what has happened. There's a great deal of greed and corruption. In politics and government, the first millionaires are made, but at the same time as millions live in poverty. There's labor strikes. There's sometimes bullies put down, and sharecroppers are only a step away from slavery. And Americans are frightened about what happened to their country. And looking back to these veterans of the Civil War, late 1880s, they're beginning to romanticize them, holding them up as the great heroes of the Republic. And the veterans themselves are banding together in veterans organizations, the Grand Army of the Republic, formed by Union veterans, and the Confederate Veterans, Society of Confederate Veterans, Sons of Confederate Veterans, for Confederate Veterans. These will be powerful lobbying agents for these men. They'll establish more national battlefields, national cemeteries like the one here at Gettysburg. They'll establish national battlefields like Chickamauga and Antietam and Gettysburg, and establish veterans pensions to take care of widows, orphans, and veterans of the Civil War. Between 1880 and 1910, 1/4 of the federal budget going to pay for Civil War pensions, widows, orphans, and veterans of the war. And believe it or not, we are still paying out federal Civil War pensions. So we're not that far away from these people as we think we are. And things gradually begin to change. One of the things that's going to help veterans are two things. First, public schools, and second, the mass media. Public schools have to assimilate millions of new immigrant children into American society, but giving them a common history of their new country. And they also have to assimilate the children of Confederate and Union veterans by giving them a politically correct history of the Civil War that everybody can agree on. The mass media will help. They'll begin publishing veterans' diaries and their letters of both generals and privates alike, and by the movies. Between 1880 and 1930, 200 silent films were made about the Civil War, and actually 400 silent films were made about the Civil War, and 200 sound films were made about the Civil War. But unfortunately, they'll focus on the courage and valor of both sides, leave out the brutality of the war, and even why the war is fought in the first place. And even today, they have a lasting effect on how Americans still see the Civil War. But gradually things begin to change, and these veterans will march in 4th of July parades and Decoration Day parades, and they'll be held up as the great heroes of the Republic. And for the last hour, I've been trying to describe to you what their lives are like, but there's really no way I can really do that. There's no way we can really understand what it was like to eat the same bad food day after day after day, to see your friends go into hospitals with disease and not see them come back, to march on dirt roads with these huge clouds of dust hanging over you, choking and blinding you. See your friends being killed and wounded around you within a matter of minutes, seeing other them mangled in the most horrific ways. There's no way we can really understand their camaraderie, because it wasn't all bad. We can't really understand what they experienced. Fortunately for us, it's beyond our experience. It's beyond what we can really imagine. But what we do know about these men, that some of them were heroes, some of them were villains, some were cowards, some were scapegoats, some were just unlucky. But most of them were just average people, just like me and you. But they lived in extraordinary times, they did extraordinary things. Now, 150 years later, they still fascinate us. We still want to know about them, and 150 years later, what these men did during this war still influences our lives even today. So I want to thank you for listening to me the last hour. If you have any questions, I'll stick around, but thank you very much for coming to Gettysburg.